Nobody lives in Los Angeles anymore, and the silence is deafening. The city that once embodied the American dream, the place where millions came to reinvent themselves, where golden sunsets painted the sky every evening and promises of success seemed written into the very air you breathed, is now hollowing out before our eyes. Why is Los Angeles dying? What signs reveal that this iconic metropolis is slowly fading into a ghost town? What you're about to discover in the next few minutes won't just surprise you. It will fundamentally change how you see one of the most famous cities on Earth. Because while the postcards still show palm trees and beaches, while Hollywood still projects images of glamour and opportunity, the reality for those who actually live there tells a completely different story. A story of exodus, collapse, and transformation that's erasing the magic of Los Angeles forever. Just 50 years ago, Los Angeles was the city everyone wanted to move to. It represented possibility in its purest form. A high school graduate from anywhere in America could pack a suitcase, drive west, and build a life. The aerospace industry employed hundreds of thousands of middle-class workers. Film studios offered careers not just for actors, but for grips, gaffers, set designers, costume makers, all the invisible hands that made Hollywood function. The defense industry thrived. Manufacturing plants dotted the landscape from Long Beach to the San Fernando Valley. You could graduate high school on Friday and start a union job on Monday that would pay for a house, a car, and a family. The beaches stretched for miles, accessible and free. Neighborhoods had character and identity. Venice was bohemian. Silver Lake was artistic. Pasadena was refined. South Central had a thriving black middle class. The San Gabriel Valley welcomed waves of immigrants who opened businesses and built communities. Los Angeles wasn't perfect. It never was. But it offered something invaluable: opportunity, the chance to build something from nothing. And people came by the millions, drawn by that promise, like moths to light. But something fundamental shifted, slowly at first, almost imperceptible. Small cracks in the facade that few wanted to acknowledge. Longtime residents started noticing differences. Young people began asking uncomfortable questions. And those who worked in city planning, in social services, in emergency rooms, they knew something essential was breaking from within. The first sign came with housing costs that defied all logic and reason. Los Angeles had always been expensive, but what happened starting in the 2000s wasn't just expensive, it was economically absurd. A modest house that sold for $200,000 in 1995 cost $800,000 by 2005. Then $1.2 million by 2015. Then $1.8 million by 2020. Meanwhile, wages barely moved. A teacher earning $50,000 a year couldn't afford to live in the city where they taught. A firefighter with 15 years of experience was priced out of the neighborhoods they protected. Nurses, mechanics, restaurant workers, the entire working and middle class that made the city actually function found themselves facing an impossible equation. Your rent was half your income, then 60%, then 70%. Then you were living with 3 roommates in your 30s. Then you were commuting 2 hours each way from Riverside or Lancaster because that was the only place you could afford. The math simply stopped working for ordinary people. Wait until you hear what happened to homelessness. Los Angeles always had homeless individuals. Every major city does. But what unfolded over the past 15 years wasn't just homelessness. It was the creation of permanent encampment cities within the city. By 2023, Los Angeles County had over 75,000 homeless individuals on any given night. Entire blocks in downtown were lined with tents, RVs, makeshift shelters stretching as far as you could see. Venice Beach, once a quirky tourist attraction, became a sprawling homeless encampment that drove away visitors and businesses. Skid Row expanded far beyond its historical boundaries. And here's what most people don't understand. These weren't all people with addiction or severe mental illness, though many struggled with those issues. These were people who had jobs, people who worked 40 hours a week but couldn't afford first and last month's rent plus deposit. Veterans who came home to find no affordable housing. Families who lost their apartment when rent increased by $600 overnight and they had nowhere to go. Senior citizens on fixed incomes who got evicted when their building was sold to developers. The city's response was tragically inadequate. A few temporary shelters, sweeps that just moved people from one block to another, political debates that went nowhere while the crisis exploded, and the visual impact was devastating. Neighborhoods that once felt safe and clean became landscapes of human suffering that residents had to navigate daily. Tourists started avoiding entire areas. Businesses closed because customers stopped coming. Property values in some neighborhoods actually declined for the first time in decades because who wants to pay $2 million for a house next to an encampment of desperate people? But that's not even the worst part. The infrastructure of Los Angeles is crumbling like ancient ruins. The city was built for cars, an enormous, sprawling network of freeways and surface streets that were supposed to connect everything seamlessly. Those roads are now parking lots for hours every day. The average Los Angeles commuter spends more than 100 hours per year sitting in traffic, going nowhere. That's nearly 3 full weeks of your life annually, just sitting in your car. The freeways themselves are falling apart, pocked with potholes that destroy tires and suspensions. The water system relies on pipes installed in the 1920s and 30s, many now over 90 years old and failing regularly. Entire neighborhoods lose water for days when ancient mains burst. The electrical grid, stressed beyond its original capacity by population growth and climate change, can't handle extreme heat days anymore. Rolling blackouts became common. The subway system, which was supposed to revolutionize transit in LA, remains incomplete, decades behind schedule and billions over budget, while ridership declines because people don't feel safe using it. Public schools operate in buildings that are literally falling apart, with mold, asbestos, broken HVAC systems. Some schools in South LA are so degraded they should be condemned, but there's no money to rebuild them and nowhere else for the kids to go. The sidewalks are cracked and broken, making the city hostile to pedestrians. Streetlights don't work, parks lack maintenance. Public bathrooms are rare and often unusable. Los Angeles is a first-world city with third-world infrastructure, and every year it gets worse because there's never enough budget to fix what's breaking faster than they can repair it. And then came the wildfires that rewrote the psychology of living there. Los Angeles always had fire risk. It's part of California's Mediterranean climate. But the frequency and intensity have reached apocalyptic levels. The Woolsey Fire in 2018 burned nearly 100,000 acres and destroyed over 1,500 structures. The air quality across the entire basin became hazardous for weeks. People wore masks everywhere years before COVID made that common. Then 2020 brought fires that turned the sky orange, blocking out the sun in the middle of the day. Ash rained down like snow. You couldn't go outside without breathing toxic air. And this wasn't occasional anymore. It was annual. Every fall became fire season, a time when you checked air quality apps before deciding if you could take your kids to school, when you kept bags packed in case evacuation orders came, when you slept uneasily knowing that a spark in the hills could become an inferno racing toward your neighborhood, driven by Santa Ana winds at 60 miles per hour. Insurance companies started dropping coverage for homes in fire zones. Then they started dropping entire zip codes. People who had paid premiums for decades suddenly couldn't get insurance at any price. And without insurance, you can't get a mortgage, which means you can't sell your house, which means you're trapped in a property that could burn down, leaving you with nothing. The psychological toll of living under that constant threat fundamentally changed what it felt like to be in Los Angeles. It stopped feeling like paradise and started feeling like survival. But wait, because there's something nobody tells you when you're planning your move to Los Angeles. The crime wave has transformed entire neighborhoods overnight. For years, Los Angeles sold itself as having recovered from the violent 90s, as being safer, more family-friendly, a place where gentrification had cleaned up rough areas. That narrative shattered violently. Starting around 2020, property crime exploded across the city. Car break-ins became so common that people stopped reporting them because police wouldn't even come. Smash and grab robberies hit luxury stores on Rodeo Drive in broad daylight, groups of thieves overwhelming security and leaving with hundreds of thousands in merchandise. Catalytic converter theft became an epidemic, with thieves sliding under your car in parking lots and sawing off the part in 90 seconds. Organized retail theft rings stripped store shelves and coordinated attacks. And it wasn't just property crime. Follow-home robberies targeted people leaving nice restaurants or clubs, criminals following them home and robbing them at gunpoint in their own driveways. Carjackings increased by over 40% in 2 years. Shootings on freeways became regular occurrences. The police, demoralized and understaffed after budget cuts and political battles, often didn't respond to property crimes at all. People learned to just accept that their car would probably be broken into eventually, that package theft was inevitable, that you needed security cameras and alarm systems just to live in a supposedly nice neighborhood. The social contract that makes city living work, the assumption that there are basic levels of safety and order, was breaking down. And that breakdown made people who could leave start thinking seriously about leaving. And then there's the drought that threatens the city's very existence. Los Angeles is a desert. It always was. The city exists only because of one of history's greatest engineering projects, the Los Angeles Aqueduct that brings water from hundreds of miles away. But that system is failing. The Colorado River, which supplies water to 25 million people, including much of Southern California, is at its lowest levels in 1,200 years. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the massive reservoirs that store that water, are dropping so low that within a few years they might not be able to deliver water downstream at all. The snowpack in the Sierra Nevada, which feeds Northern California rivers that are also diverted to LA, is shrinking year by year as temperatures rise. Meanwhile, the population of Greater Los Angeles is over 13 million people, all needing water for drinking, cooking, bathing, washing, watering lawns, filling swimming pools. The math doesn't work. Water restrictions that used to be temporary during droughts are becoming permanent. But even strict conservation won't solve the fundamental problem. There isn't enough water for the number of people trying to live in a desert. Some hydrologists predict that within 20 years, Los Angeles will face mandatory reductions in water delivery of 30 to 50%. What does that mean practically? It means some neighborhoods might have water only certain days of the week. It means lawns and landscaping dying across the region. It means businesses that use water closing. It means asking millions of people to either use a fraction of the water they currently do or leave. You can't have a megacity in a desert without water. And the water is running out. But perhaps the clearest sign that Los Angeles is dying is something you can see with your own eyes if you look at population data. For the first time in over a century, Los Angeles is shrinking. The city lost over 170,000 residents between 2020 and 2023. That might not sound like much in a city of 4 million, but it represents a fundamental reversal of a trend that defined Los Angeles since its founding: endless growth. And it's not just people leaving, it's who's leaving. Young professionals are moving to Austin, Denver, Nashville, Phoenix, cities with lower costs and easier lifestyles. Families are leaving for the suburbs or other states where their income can actually provide a middle-class life. Retirees are cashing out their million-dollar homes and moving somewhere cheaper. Entertainment industry workers are following production to Georgia, New Mexico, Canada. Tech workers are going to San Francisco or Seattle or just working remotely from anywhere but LA. The people leaving are exactly the people a city needs: educated, working age, economically productive, and families. Who's staying? People who can't afford to leave. People too old to move. People wealthy enough that the problems don't affect them. And people still arriving from other countries or states who haven't yet realized the dream is mostly gone. And if you think city leadership is addressing these cascading crises effectively, let me tell you what's really happening. Los Angeles governance is a masterclass in dysfunction. The city council is notorious for corruption, with multiple members facing federal charges in recent years for bribery and fraud. The Byzantine relationship between city, county, and state governments means that responsibility for problems gets passed around endlessly with nobody taking ownership. The budget is constrained by pension obligations that consume an ever-growing percentage of revenue, leaving less for actual services. Attempts at reform get bogged down in political infighting. Homeless initiatives waste millions on consultants and studies while tents multiply. Transit projects take decades and cost billions more than projected. Attempts to build affordable housing face so many regulatory hurdles and community opposition that almost nothing gets built. The police department and community activists are locked in perpetual conflict with no middle ground. Every election brings promises of change, and every term brings more of the same dysfunction. There's a civic paralysis where everyone acknowledges the problems, but the political system seems incapable of responding with anything but symbolic gestures and incremental adjustments to problems that require revolutionary solutions. So, what does all this mean for Los Angeles? Where does a city go when the very elements that made it attractive are disappearing? The answer is that Los Angeles is entering a spiral that's very hard to reverse. As quality of life degrades, people and businesses that have options leave. That reduces the tax base, which means less money for services and infrastructure, which accelerates deterioration, which drives more people away. We've seen this pattern before in American cities. Detroit was once the wealthiest city per capita in America, the engine of the national economy, a symbol of American innovation and prosperity. Then the auto industry declined, and white flight accelerated. And within 30 years, it was bankrupt, with whole neighborhoods abandoned. Cleveland, St. Louis, Baltimore, all followed similar trajectories. Cities that were economic powerhouses became cautionary tales. Los Angeles has enormous advantages those cities didn't have. Better weather, more diverse economy, global cultural influence. But the fundamentals are alarming. When the cost of living becomes disconnected from what people earn, when basic city services fail, when infrastructure crumbles, when natural disasters and resource scarcity make the place difficult to inhabit, when crime makes people feel unsafe, people leave. And once that exodus reaches critical mass, it becomes self-reinforcing. But there's something even deeper happening here that transcends economics and policy. We're watching the death of a certain American mythology. Los Angeles represented the ultimate expression of American optimism, the belief that you could go west, reinvent yourself, build a dream life through hard work and determination. California was where you went when you wanted a fresh start. Los Angeles specifically embodied endless possibility. The entertainment industry made dreams come true. The aerospace industry built the future. The beaches and mountains and perfect weather were the physical manifestation of paradise. For generations, Los Angeles was proof that the American dream worked. And now, as that model collapses under the weight of inequality, climate change, and political dysfunction, we're losing not just a city, but the story we told ourselves about American possibility. Because if Los Angeles, with all its advantages, with all its wealth, with all its global significance, can't figure out how to remain a viable place for ordinary people to build good lives, what does that say about the American project more broadly? What does it mean when the city of dreams becomes the city of impossible dreams? The families who built lives in Los Angeles over generations tell stories of what it used to be like. They remember when you could buy a house on a teacher's salary in Pasadena or Manhattan Beach. They remember when traffic was bad but manageable. They remember when homeless people were rare individuals, not visible everywhere you looked. They remember when summers were hot, but you didn't fear for your life from fire or heat. They remember when the city felt safe enough to walk at night in most neighborhoods. They remember when public schools were good enough that middle-class families didn't feel compelled to go private. They remember when the beach was where you went on Sunday and parking wasn't impossible. They remember when Los Angeles felt like it was getting better every year, building towards something greater. Now they look around and see decay. They see potential wasted. They see a city that seems to be giving up on itself. There's a deep sadness when they talk about the Los Angeles they lost, a melancholy for something that existed and will never return. And the younger generation doesn't even have those memories. They only know the expensive, crowded, chaotic, increasingly unlivable version. The urban planners and economists who study Los Angeles publish reports with grim projections. If current trends continue, they forecast that by 2040, Los Angeles will have lost another 500,000 to 1 million residents. The tax base will shrink significantly. Infrastructure will deteriorate further without funding for repairs. The homeless population could exceed 150,000 without dramatic intervention. Water restrictions will be severe and permanent. Fire risk will increase as climate change progresses. The wealth gap will widen with only the very wealthy and very poor remaining. The middle class will be effectively extinct in Los Angeles County, and the city will increasingly become a tale of two worlds, gated communities for the rich and everyone else struggling to survive in a deteriorating urban landscape. Some researchers use terminology that sounds extreme but reflects their data. Urban decline on a scale not seen since the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt. And they're not talking about something that might happen, they're describing what's already occurring. Business analysts also express concern from another angle. Los Angeles County has the largest economy of any county in the United States, larger than most countries. The entertainment industry alone generates hundreds of billions in economic activity. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are critical infrastructure for American trade. If the region enters serious decline, the economic impact would be catastrophic, not just locally, but nationally. Yet the paradox is that maintaining current growth patterns guarantees future decline. It's like an addict needing ever-increasing doses to feel the same effect, knowing each dose brings them closer to final collapse. The economists who truly understand sustainability argue that Los Angeles needs to fundamentally rethink its model, limit growth, invest massively in public infrastructure, address inequality, adapt to climate reality, and accept that the endless expansion model is over. But in an economic system that rewards quarterly results and punishes anything that looks like restraining growth, these recommendations are ignored. Developers want profits now. Politicians need impressive numbers during their terms. Nobody's thinking 50 years ahead. Everyone's optimizing for the present, even though that guarantees there won't be a future. And perhaps the most tragic element is that alternatives exist. There are models of sustainable urban development that work in other parts of the world. Cities that invested in public transit and reduced car dependency. Cities that built affordable housing at scale through smart policy. Cities that adapted to climate challenges proactively. Cities that maintained livability while growing. Copenhagen redesigned itself around bicycles and public space. Singapore achieved density without sprawl through careful planning. Vienna maintained housing affordability through large-scale public housing programs. Montreal preserved neighborhoods while growing its transit system. These examples demonstrate that it's possible to have thriving cities that remain livable for ordinary people. Los Angeles could learn from these models, could transform. But transformation requires political courage, long-term vision, and willingness to challenge powerful interests. And so far, there's no sign that those with the power to decide are willing to take that path. So we arrive at the inevitable question: is it too late for Los Angeles? If tomorrow every correct policy was implemented, if all new development was sustainable, if billions were invested in public infrastructure, if housing policy was reformed to enable affordability, if climate adaptation was prioritized, if inequality was addressed seriously, could Los Angeles recover? Experts say yes, technically possible, but it would require such a radical transformation of the current model that it would amount to completely reinventing the city. And that reinvention would have to occur while millions of people depend economically on the existing system. It's like trying to rebuild an airplane while it's flying. Difficult, risky, requires perfect coordination, and any mistake could be catastrophic. Some damage, like decades of deferred infrastructure maintenance or ecological degradation, would take generations to reverse, even in the best scenario. Other damage is already permanent. What's lost can't be recovered.
You can only try to preserve what remains and build something new that's wiser, more sustainable, more humane. But each day that passes without decisive action makes recovery harder and eventual. Perhaps the most important lesson Los Angeles teaches the world isn't about urbanism, but about ourselves as a species. Our inability to value something beautiful without destroying it in the process of consuming it. Our tendency to prioritize immediate gains over future consequences. Our willingness to ignore warnings until disaster is undeniable. Los Angeles is a microcosm of larger global challenges: climate change, unsustainable resource exploitation, economic inequality, Loss of social cohesion, collapse of public institutions. Everything's present here in a condensed and visible form. And if we can't solve these problems in a relatively wealthy area with enormous resources and global attention, what chance do we have of solving them at planetary scale?
But let's set aside pessimism briefly, because among all the deterioration and destruction, there's still beauty in Los Angeles. There are still moments when the sun sets over the Pacific and the colors are so intense they take your breath away. There are still neighborhoods with character and community. There are still people working passionately to make things better. Activists fighting for affordable housing. Environmentalists protecting remaining wild spaces. Teachers dedicating themselves to students despite impossible conditions. Artists creating despite everything. Families maintaining traditions and building connections. There are still reasons for hope, not naive hope that ignores reality, but active hope that recognizes problems and works to solve them. There's still time to change course if we act now with real commitment and courage. And maybe that's the final sign of whether Los Angeles is dying or can live.
It's not the housing costs, or homelessness, or infrastructure, or fires, or water, or crime. It's whether we, collectively, decide it's worth saving. If residents demand change and vote for leaders willing to make hard choices. If businesses accept smaller profits in exchange for sustainable operations. If wealthy homeowners support affordable housing even in their neighborhoods. If everyone recognizes that a city is a collective project that requires collective sacrifice to maintain, Los Angeles can die completely, become another victim of unchecked capitalism and climate change, another example of beauty destroyed by greed and short-sighted thinking. Or it can transform, find a new model that actually works for people, that respects environmental limits, that creates opportunity without exploitation. The choice is still ours, but time is running out rapidly. Empty tables in restaurants that used to have waiting lists. Freeways with less traffic than 5 years ago. For sale signs staying up for months in neighborhoods where houses used to sell in days. U-Haul trucks heading east loaded with people's entire lives. Dreams abandoned of California golden. Maybe there's still hope for Los Angeles. Maybe we can learn from the mistakes before it's completely too late. Maybe this place that represented possibility and reinvention can find a new way to exist that honors both people and planet. We've watched the change happen. We've seen the decline. Now it's up to us to decide if it's worth fighting to recover what was lost. It's time we remembered what Los Angeles used to mean and what it still could be if we choose to save it instead of abandoning it. If you felt this transformation too, if you've lived in LA or visited and noticed the changes, share your experience in the comments. And if this opened your eyes to realities you didn't know, subscribe, because the next story will explore where everyone who left Los Angeles is going and what new cities are taking the place LA once held. The world keeps changing. The question is whether we'll learn from these changes or repeat the same mistakes in the next place we decide to call paradise.